into the garden. Today I'm going to show you how I prep my entire garden in as little as one day. We're going to start by clearing away last year's debris. I always like to wear gloves because there can be spiders crawling around in these leaves. You can use a rake to clear your in-ground beds really quickly, but just be careful of your perennials. I have asparagus in this bed, and I like to clear around it by hand just so I don't damage any new sprouts. And I insulate my beds with dry leaves over winter to protect from the cold. But now that we're into spring, they're actually holding the cold into that soil. So now that dark soil is going to get direct contact with the sun and really start to heat up. This is parsley, and we can actually see some ice. So this soil is going to need to thaw a little bit more before I do any planting. And we're also going to remove any weeds. I can see a dandelion right over here. And let's take a look at that soil. So this is mostly just native soil and my own homemade compost. Over time, you can really improve your soil by adding different amendments. And if you like, you can go through and just loosen up all that soil. Get rid of last year's root wads. Soil can kind of get compacted and just settle over time. So aerating it can kind of fluff it up a little bit. It'll provide great space for those brand new roots to form. And it'll make it a lot easier to dig in when we go to plant our tomatoes and peppers. And you don't need to start with perfect soil. You can start with whatever you've got. I can still see big balls of clay, and that's just from my native soil. So to both fill this back up and add some nutrients, I'm going to be adding my homemade compost. You can really add as much as you want. This compost is incredibly fluffy compared to the clay-rich native soil that I kind of used as a foundation for my garden. So I like to mix these about 50-50 native soil and compost, and that creates a really nice fluffy mix. If you don't have a lot of compost, you just want to mix it into the first couple inches. That's really where it's most important. Another great addition to your in-ground beds or containers is potting soil. You can certainly use it straight out of the bag, but I like to use this indoors and wait until I have an extra plant that I can bring out into the garden. This is an old palm tree that kind of died back last year, and I really didn't have space for it, so I decided to get rid of it. But look at all that beautiful potting soil. So I'll mix this with my native soil and some compost, and we'll have a really light and incredibly rich garden soil. If you don't have any potting soil or finished compost, you can actually add uncomposted material. It's just going to take a few months or even years to break down. But you can dig in vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, even dried leaves, and if you shred them up nice and small, they'll decompose really quickly. Eggshells and banana peels are great. Just want to break those apart, and then you really want to bury them completely. That'll keep them moist, and it'll encourage worms and other little creatures to start breaking these down for you. So I'm going to dig down as deep as I can, all the way into that really kind of clay-rich, compacted soil down at the very bottom. And then we're going to bury our composting materials. So we'll do vegetables on this side, and then we'll cover them back up. And then we'll do a log on the other side. It's actually frozen down here. And eventually this will break down and add lots of good carbon. So it's kind of punky and spongy. That's the perfect type of wood. So that's what's known as hugelkultur. Hugelkultur is really great for in-ground beds, but I still actually use that on my containers. When I'm starting one of these from scratch, I'll line it with sticks down at the bottom. I've got one final trick for topping up all of last year's containers, and that's by just sacrificing one pot. I'll usually pick something medium size like this and just dump out as much soil as I want to fill this one and the next one until the whole thing is empty. And then I'll just start that container from scratch. Now that we're all prepped, I'm going to be planting only cool hardy crops. We've got spinach, carrots, peas, parsley, radishes, broccoli, all sorts of different kinds of lettuce. I'm planting some beets. Now is a great time to plant dill, kale, celery, and a few summer crops like cucumbers. I'm also planting some backup cucumbers in the greenhouse, as well as other summer crops like peppers and tomatoes. Now that our soil's all prepped, I like to take off the gloves and really get my hands dirty. It's great to feel that soil and really tell how light it is, whether you think it needs more compost, and maybe pick out some of those larger chunks and old roots. We're gonna plant out some plugs of spinach and some seeds. I was actually gonna grow these in the greenhouse, but we've got a really nice stretch of weather, so I've decided to plant them out in the garden. These spinach look beautiful. You can see the first true leaves. The seed leaves are really thin, so sometimes you'll see those in the spinach packets you buy at the store. Those are just the little seed leaves, so they're not actually a different plant. I'm just gonna first loosen them up by pushing up on the bottom. Then we can kind of isolate one and just very gently tease it out. If you've packed that soil in really well, it should come out in one nice piece. If it's a little loose, you just want to pack that potting soil into your seed cells a little bit tighter. We could split these plants up, but you do risk damaging them. But if you want to, you can either soak them in water or just gently tease them apart, and hopefully by giving these a little bit more space they'll get a little bit bigger. So now we can just spread these out, give them a little bit more space, a little bit more sun. Now to fill in some of these empty spots and to plant most of my other containers, I'm just going to sow out seeds. So we can do a little row around the outside edge in kind of a ring. I'll just dig it a couple centimeters deep, or about a half an inch. As a general guideline, I like to plant the seeds as deep as they are tall, or up to about twice that deep. These are seeds I actually grew myself last year. I let the entire container go to flower and produce a whole bunch of seeds. Because in a packet you only get about 20 seeds, and you really need to plant a lot of spinach, so I basically sacrificed an entire harvest or two just to get a bigger harvest this year. It's good to try and space them out about an inch or two apart, but I usually like to plant a little bit closer. That way I can weed out the smaller ones and maybe even transplant them. And then all together, I'll just scoop over that soil. You can also sprinkle on a few seeds and then press them in like this. Because our soil is nice and soft with all that compost, we can really bury them as deep as we like. Now we're just going to water these in. Because we planted those seeds a couple centimeters deep, they're not going to wash up as we really flood this container with water. So whether you're starting a single container, in-ground bed, or planting out your entire garden, I hope you get out there this spring and give it a grow. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.